There were a number of issues with the explanation at a range of different levels, from the initial justification of acting at the peak of the pandemic to take on resources which had nothing to do with it, and also acting in 2021 and deciding to take responsibility at least at an administrative level of Treasury 5 days before Josh Frydenberg's budget last year. Again, not at the peak of the pandemic, Andrew.
Well, Kieran, I think you could call it not a clear narrative if you were not being too unkind about it, because suddenly when we're trying to say, well, why in 2021, after the initial health finance move at the peak of the crisis, why in 2021 are you swearing yourself into Home Affairs and Treasury? He starts talking about AUKUS and the submarine agreement, then says he didn't make any decisions in relation to it. It all got a bit confusing. Let's have a look at some of the exchanges with me, including, why'd you deceive people?
Why did you deceive the Australian public and your Treasurer and Finance Minister about this?
Well, I don't share that view.
They didn't know.
I didn't inform them. Had I been in the situation, Andrew, where those powers had to be used, then I believe that was the time to have that conversation, because that's when the powers would be enacted.
All right, well,
the powers were established as an emergency power. The powers that were later established, there were 5 portfolios. The latter ones, as I indicated in my statement yesterday, I think in hindsight proved to be unnecessary.
But Mr Morrison, you told Greg Hunt, and the book says, you said I wasn't being sworn in as Health Minister. The book, and I presume you spoke to the authors of the book about this, am I right in assuming that?
Keep going.
Says you swore, I trust you, but I'm swearing myself in as Health Minister.
Well, that meant I was swearing myself to have authorities under the portfolio.
The former Prime Minister there, and as we said, we heard from one of his friends who clearly thought he went down the wrong path. We know privately the likes of Josh Frydenberg absolutely furious with the fact that he wasn't brought into the former Prime Minister's confidence, and even so much so that some senior Liberals have been saying today, privately at least, that he would have been rolled at the end of last year if all of this erupted publicly.
Which is quite extraordinary that you're hearing that, Kieran. But I think there's a very simple answer for why he was secretive about this, and Stuart Robert indicated it there. Cabinet wouldn't have accepted it. The Finance Minister wouldn't have accepted it. The Treasurer wouldn't have accepted it. They would have said, you don't need these powers. And so I posed the question to him about, was it because you didn't have the courage to ask them?
Why not even just let your Cabinet colleagues know, if not the broader Australian public?
Well, as I said, I apologise for any concern this has caused about those issues, and I understand that concern, and that's why I'm standing here today. But at the same time, I did not want any of my ministers to be going about their daily business any different to what they were doing before.
So you didn't trust them with that knowledge?
It looks like you didn't have the courage to tell them. It looks like you didn't have the courage to tell them, Mr Morrison.
I did what I thought was necessary in the national interest to ensure the government continued to perform well, which it did.
Now, one of the things you also put to the former Prime Minister relates to, I think, the heart of the issue when it comes to the Governor-General, and that is, did he advise the then Prime Minister to make it all public, to divulge it to the Parliament, to the Australian people?
Or ask whether it should be, because there is a bit of a grey area there. If you say, look, you should make this public, maybe that's not the GG's role. They act on instruction from the PM. You could say, shouldn't we be making this public? Does it have to be in secret? I can't imagine that not happening, but he is a military man, David Hurley. Perhaps he just acts on orders. Perhaps his office inquired. Scott Morrison wouldn't confirm or deny this.
Mr Morrison, we have a right to know whether he said to you, shouldn't we make this public? Can you at least tell us that? You've been secret about this whole business.
Oh, you were asking me to go into conversations between me and the Governor-General, which I'm not going to do. So
we assume he did?
No,
he did question you.
No, you can't assume anything,
well,
Andrew.
Easy to deny,
and I'm not going to. Well, I'm not going to be verballed, Andrew, or bullied in this press conference by you trying to put words in my mouth.
Was he
respecting a long-standing principle and convention that the Governor-General and the Prime Minister have many conversations. The Governor-General took the advice of the day from the government and acted accordingly
Did he
and
have a
ensured...
question?
That is
Whether
not...
it should be public?
Andrew, that is not something that any former Prime Minister would responsibly answer in divulging conversations with the Governor-General, and you can draw no conclusion from that.
Look, ultimately you press as hard as you can as a journalist, and if they choose not to answer, they choose not to answer. The problem for Scott Morrison is that invites the feeling you get that perhaps the GG said it could be made public. To his credit here, Scott Morrison, he does say, look, he accepts some people, a lot of people might not accept his explanation for doing this.
I mean, I accept that you may not accept my explanation, and I accept that there may be many out there who don't. But I've given that explanation, and that's why I'm here today.